So good morning, everyone. I'm also happy that you are all here despite the coding night. As he already said, I'm going to talk about fluid components in production. Fluid components is an extension that we at sitegeist developed about a year ago, and we've been using it since in all of our new projects to create better front ends. So at first I'm going to talk about me a little bit, but just a little bit. Then I'm going to define what a component means for me or for this talk. After that, I'm going to explain to you how the extension works and how you can create fluid components. After that, I'm going to talk about the challenges we encountered when we tried to use them in our real projects. And last but not least, I'm going to talk about what's next in the development of the extension and further. Yeah, first about me, that's me. I'm Simon Praetorius, or Simon Praetorius. I've written my first HTML in 2004. I started with TYPO3 in 2009. And since 2017, I'm a senior developer at sitegeist in Hamburg. That's some of the things I do there. I'm a technical lead at some of our projects. I do some software architecture. I, of course, develop for TYPO3, and I also do some TYPO3 coaching, both internal and for clients. And also, I'm here today because I do some open source work, mainly TYPO3 extensions. So first, what is a component? A component can mean everything and nothing, so I'm going to talk about what do I mean for this talk when I talk about a component. And I prepared some nice emoji for that. First of all, a component for me in this talk is some piece of code, usually some markup, but also some CSS alongside and maybe some JavaScript. But for the purpose of this talk, it's markup, fluid. A component for me should be mostly presentational, so it should define how some interface element or something on the website looks like and how it works on the front end, but it shouldn't contain any backend logic, so it should be independent of that. It should be encapsulated, so that it doesn't leak any information out of the component if you use the component, so it should be safe to use the component whenever you want to use it. It should provide a clear API for the component, so that it becomes clear from the API what the component does and what it doesn't do. That makes the component hopefully highly reusable across the whole project. And last but not least, that's a pretty cool fact about components. If you encapsulate your interface elements, you can enforce both design guidelines and accessibility guidelines and whatever else you want to do right inside the component, so everyone who uses the component later doesn't need to care about the design guidelines or accessibility guidelines you defined right inside of the component. So next step, how do fluid components work? So how can we use components in TYPO3? As I've already said, that's the extension. It's called Fluid Components. It's about a year old, and as I've already said, we've been using it since because it makes things really easy compared to how it was before. So what I usually hear when there's a new extension around the block, why do we need another extension? We have already partials, we have view helpers, why do we need another thing in Fluid? And I'm going to show you why I think that it's a helpful other thing to have, components, because of those three facts. The first one is in which language the thing, partials, view helpers, or fluid components is defined. The next one is that it should have a clear API definition, and the last one is that it should be easily reusable across the whole project, not just in one extension, but across the whole project. So how does that look like for partials? Well, partials are written in Fluid. That's the language they use, so that's fine for front-end developers. But they don't really provide an API definition. So you can put some data into the partial, but you don't see from the outside what does the partial really need. You can search for variables inside of the partial, but that's not really good if you want to have a clear API definition and want to separate the presentation from the logic. And it should also be reusable, and the partial is partly reusable. But because of partial root paths, you would have to set it for every extension again, and that becomes quite cumbersome and can also have strange effects when you have files with the same file name, which will override each other. Next, how do view helpers do in that? Well, they have 2 check marks. It's better than before, but they are written in PHP, so front-end developers can't really deal with that. They want to focus on the markup part and not write PHP. So what we thought about is, can't we combine those 2? And that's how Fluid Components, how we thought about Fluid Components. They are written in Fluid, but they have a clear API definition, and they can be reused across the whole project, just like view helpers, because we use the namespaces just like with view helpers. So the next step I want to do is to look at the development workflow, how it would work when you want to use components in your website. So usually there are 2 parts, at the moment they melt into each other, but we want to try to separate them. The one part is the integration part, where you actually build your project, but we want to do another part where you build the components separately and then later integrate them into the project. So the integration part is just like before. You have fluid layouts, templates, and partials, which you can use to create a layout on your site and to call components within that. Then there's the component API, where you define the API between the integrator or backend developer and the front-end developer. And then there's the renderer part of the component, where the front-end developer can define what to do with the data the component gets over the API. So the responsibilities are as follows. The front-end developer is mainly responsible for the renderer part of the component, but also for the API. But it's pretty important that the integrator or whoever else is responsible, maybe also a backend developer, is part of the decision how the API looks like. So they agree first on the API, and then they can work separately. The integrator can already start integrating the component into the website, while the front-end developer is still working on the details of the component. So they can work independently and don't have that much clash with each other. So let's look at this workflow with an example. I chose a teaser component, and it's called Molecule because we usually use Atomic Design by Brad Frost. If you want to know more about that, you can later follow this link. It's a pretty cool way to structure components. So that's some kind of a wireframe of the component we want to build. It's a teaser, as I already said, and it has a few elements in it. It has a title, it has a description, it has an icon, and the whole teaser is linked. So it also has a link or link destination, and it also has a parameter which is called theme. So the teaser has a light and a dark theme in our example. So how would we build this? As I said before, we would usually start with the API definition. So both stacks come together and work together on the API definition. That's how it would look like in Fluid Components. You create a new file structure within your extension. It's alongside templates, partials, and layouts. There's another folder that's called components. Inside of that folder, you can nest other folders. In our case, we just have atom, molecule, and organism usually. And inside of that folder, there are the components. In our case, there's a teaser component. So that's a folder, and inside of that folder is an HTML file which contains Fluid code. And inside of that folder, you can also later put the CSS relevant to this component and the JavaScript relevant to this component, also documentation files. So it's really encapsulated, as I said before. So inside of that HTML file, you define a component with FC component. That's just a wrapper around everything that belongs to the component. And you can define parameters just like with Fluid ViewHelpers. That's also pretty much the same that is used internally for the ViewHelpers. We just expose it to Fluid. You define the params with the FC param ViewHelper. Each param, of course, has a name and has a type. You can both use scalar types like string or integers. You can also use arrays, and you can use some more complex data structures like I used here. We will see about this later, this data structure. Every parameter can be optional. By default, every parameter is required. So this was chosen because we thought about that the component should be really strict about the API, so you have to explicitly say this is optional. So then, because when you define a parameter as optional, you have to check in the renderer if it's there or if it's not there, and this way it's pretty explicitly defined. And each optional parameter can also have a default value. In this case, it's light. So if you call the component without a theme, by default the component is light, and else you can define your own theme variant. So that's how the API definition would look like. Next, let's look at the renderer definition. That would be the part that is purely the responsibility of the front end. That's how it looks like. You see above there's the FC component part again, and the params would go there where the ... is. Then you define a FC renderer tag in which the rendering definition of the component lies. Inside of that, every parameter will become a variable you can use there. So in this case, I use title because it's defined above in the FC param ViewHelper. And there are also some special variables like the content. If you call the tag, and the tag content of the component can also be used there. And also some component metadata things like you can create prefixes automatically for your CSS classes. Of course, because it's just Fluid, you can also use every ViewHelper, but I would advise to not use every ViewHelper, but only a few of them, because the component should be mainly without any logic within it. So if is okay for me, but some more complex things like the link ViewHelpers shouldn't be called inside of the component. We'll see about this later. And of course, which is pretty important, you can call a component within a component. Here you already see how you call a component, just like a ViewHelper. Because of course you want to call an atom within a molecule to build larger components from smaller parts. So again, this is how the renderer looks like. And the last part is, of course, the integration. So once you build your components, you want to create a website out of it. So the integrator would go into the layout template or the partial and would call the component there, and we've already seen it before. If the namespace isn't already there, you define it, but usually you define one global namespace for your component set, and then you just call it like a view helper, although it's not a view helper, it's a component. So as you can see, it's pretty explicitly called, and you know at the first view what is happening there. So you just include a teaser that links to typo3.org, etc. Yeah, that's how the integration would look like. So the next step I want to take is to show you what the challenges were. As I already said, we've been using it for about a year, and the component part I just shown you, it has stayed the same from the beginning, so this works pretty well. But there are a few things where it clashes with how Typo3 or Fluid work at the moment, because it wasn't made for that. So we have to find solutions for those parts. And when I come back to my beautiful emojis, there are two things where we, let's say, stumbled upon some problems. Mainly those two. Logicless becomes pretty hard in when you do it in practice, because there's so much logic in Fluid view helpers and all in Fluid, because we are used to integrate and transform data there, which shouldn't really be part of the component. So that was pretty hard, and also pretty hard, which belongs to this logicless part, is to define a clear API for the component. And I want to show you two examples where this was a problem and where we hopefully solved it. I just released this part yesterday during the code night, so let's see how it works out. Yeah, the problem with this API is that the Fluid view helper currently, in some cases, have a very convoluted API. So there are many ways to call a view helper. I don't know if everyone knows all of those. These are some of the ways you can create an image, which doesn't cover everything. So, of course, you can use the FIL objects there, but you can also use a file reference ID, you can use a file ID, you can use this combined identifier, that's the second line, and the first line is, of course, a file from an extension, but this doesn't cover external files at the moment, because it shouldn't, because in the current logic, there's no need to put the current file through the Typo3 logic, the remote file through Typo3 logic. You can just use an image tag. But if you want to define a component that gets an image, this image should be able to come from everywhere. So this is a problem. Another smaller problem was this thing, links. You would think, yeah, a link is a link, so what's the problem? The problem is that that Typo3 offers a link wizard in the backend, which generates something like this down there. So you can define the link. This link goes to page 23. But you can also define a target, and you can, there where the dash is, you could define CSS classes, because why not? And you can define a link title, which is pretty helpful for SEO, for example. So that's useful, but there's, again, no clear data structure, because the second part, if you don't want to use any Typo3 magic within components, you can't pass that to a component, because the component doesn't know what to do with it. So we had to find a solution for those two, and I hope we did, because then we define some missing data structures for our cases, which are now part of the extension, which you can use if you want to use it. The first one is the image data structure, which is pretty complex because there are many ways to use an image in a component. Each image has a public URL, it has an alternative text, which you can use in the alt attribute then, and it has a title, which you can also use in the title attribute. And there are various ways of this image. There's one way where you get the image from the FIL. This class just wraps around the FIL class and exposes the values from there to the component. But there can also be local images, as we've seen before, like from an extension. There can also be remote images, which is then a full URL. And we also defined a class for placeholder images, so you can test your components with by just specifying a width and a height value if you don't have the image yet. And for links, we defined another data structure, which is of course typed Typolink. It extends link, so link is a basic variant of that which only has a URL, and Typolink has these other 3 parameters I talked about. So there's a URL and a title, a target, and a class name, CSS class name. And how can we use these data structures with components? Because the image part is quite complex. I would refer you to the documentation I wrote yesterday. But I want to show you how it works with Typolink, and in the end it's mainly the same. Well, of course, you define your parameter link as this data structure with the type of the data structure, and then when you already have such an object, of course you can pass it right in, but usually you don't have such an object because it's not used anywhere at the moment, and really it shouldn't be. So what I thought about is how can we convert the values we usually use in templates to this object without any real hassle. And that's when I came up with this idea. The Typolink data structure implements a few interfaces, which each has an own constructor, and when you put something like an integer into a call of a component like this, 1337, the fluid components already automatically converts this to an object. So if you put an object there, there's an object, but if you put an integer there, you get automatically a link to this page in TYPO3. So it becomes pretty easy to call these components without creating any objects. Well, integer is pretty basic. Let's think about strings. Yeah, you can put this Typolink monster in there, and it splits it apart, and you can use the variables in your component to define the markup you want for the link. But it also, of course, supports links without this other stuff at the end, and it supports mail to links, probably phone links, whatever you want. And it becomes even cooler if you consider arrays, because then you can define this Typolink thing without creating a range string with any dashes in between. You can just define what you want. In this case, it would be a link to typo3.org in a new window. So when we consider all this, let's look at the ideal development workflow we want to implement at sitegeist with components. Well, as we've already seen, there's the API part where they work together, both stacks. The front end is now mainly responsible for the presentational part, so they can focus on CSS and the basic markup for that and some JavaScript. And the integrator is responsible for at least these three. The component assembling, so you put the component in your layout of the site. You acquire the data from somewhere. Usually it's already there in the template from the backend, but sometimes you have to acquire it from somewhere. And of course, as we've seen just yet, the data transformation, if the data comes in a different format than you want, you need to take care of that. And now the roles are better separated than before. Yeah. So as we've seen, this is the current state of fluid components. So what's next? There are a lot of steps within the extension we need to tackle. I think there are some more data structures left that are not really defined and that we need later. We've also had some struggles with form elements because there's a lot of logic within these view helpers. We found a solution, but I'm not really happy with it because it makes the template pretty large. So there are a lot of small things, of course, documentation, testing, whatever. But one big thing we wanted to do is a living style guide. Because when we have components that are purely presentational, you could create a style guide from that. And define your components right within Fluid and have the style guide as a way of collaboration between the front end, the back end, the project management, maybe also the customer, or if you want to create several sites for one customer, you can use the style guide to see what's already there, what do I need to build. So it's mainly a communication collaboration tool. And fortunately, one of our clients said, yeah, great, we want to do that. And he sponsored a first prototype of that style guide. And yeah, it's called Fluid Style Guide. So yeah, quite obviously. And I have a few screenshots. It's really early prototype, so it's not ready for release, but I think it will be in the next weeks, hopefully. Weeks, I said. Yeah, I have a few screenshots. So that's what it looks like, pretty basic at the moment. You have a list of all the components you defined, or all the components where you define some example data to render it in the style guide. Down there you see an avatar component, or some variant of the avatar component, and you see a select. And the components are also fully operational there because they are related and work independently of everything around it. You have a select above there where you can enter the component name, and when you press enter, you get to the detail page, where you see, of course, the component in the rendered state, but you can also see some metadata below there. In this case, I am at a tab where you can see the API definition, but you can also see the first tab is an example call of the component. How does it look like when you call it? And the last tab is the rendered markup, and you could also add some more tabs here, which probably makes sense. Also, we are thinking about adding markdown documentations per component right in there, which would be really helpful for bigger components when you put the documentation right next to the component. And what's also pretty cool is that we already implemented several example sets. So there's always a default example set, but you can also select others. And in this case, before it was business, and then I select professional, and then you see the other variant of the component. So it's pretty cool to test various ways the component can look like, and it can also help front-end developers actually developing the components while the integration isn't ready yet. So they don't need a template where they call the component with several variants because they don't have the real data. They can just define the real data in a JSON file and then can test the various variants of the component. Yeah, so as I said, it's pretty early for this part. Fluid Components is ready, but Fluid Style Guide is still under development. But I think we will release it soon. Stay tuned. That's all I wanted to talk about. Here are some links where you can look it up, where you can test out the extension. Yeah, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Okay, thank you very much. So, are there any questions? Now is your chance. No?
Hi, thank you for the stuff. Really cool to see that everything works out works out pretty well. You may have seen, I've noticed the same stuff on Twitter when we recently discussed. Hello, when we recently discussed about, I think it was also links, I guess, and also in the changes how Trick, for example, has no tag builder, but we somehow need to overcome this. And so the solution is really great, interface looking great, so just great job what you did. Did you already check out with Klaus about what's upcoming in Fluid 3.0? Because it looks really similar to that. And how would be your migration plan to Fluid 3 as soon as it's released?
Yeah, I just saw it a few days ago. The Twitter, I think he tweeted eight things about Fluid 3. That's all I've seen since, and I've checked around in the repository, but it's not really documented, so I don't know how it really looks like. But I think it would be clearly possible to migrate to Fluid 3. I don't know if he has this data structures, but I don't think that's a problem because you can just use them there also. And my plan would be to provide a migration once it's there, but until then, you can use it. Yeah.
Perfect, thank you.
More questions?
Hi. Is there any IDE support regarding the parameters of a component? Optional parameters, auto-completion, stuff like this? Or is there anything in the planning?
Not yet, but I've fiddled around with it, and I don't think it would be a huge problem. My main problem is that I'm not a PHP Storm user, so I tried to use it in VS Code, and it was a bit clunky there. But yeah, I think it's pretty easy to create such an XML. I think it's XLT or like that, something like that. With all of the atoms, molecules, all of the components in the project, and then to have auto-completion in the IDE.
At the moment you just see compile errors of a parameter is missing.
I don't know how it looks in PHP
not
Storm.
compile errors, but
Probably it will look like that, yes.
Okay, more questions? Okay, doesn't look like. So, thank you very much. And don't forget to vote for this talk on the door. As in the last days, there are some colorful cards. just word there. Thank you.